Let's talk about knives. I first heard the concept of knives at a panel that I did at PAX Unplugged in 2019 on world building for lazy dungeon masters with Mackenzie Diarmas, James Hake, Renee Rhodes, and Morrigan Robbins. The idea behind knives is that a player hands you a bit of fiction. It might be some of their backstory. It might be an offhand remark. It might be something that they describe in the world that their characters are seeing. But basically, a player is handing you a little bit of the fiction of the world. And this piece of fiction has some sharp edges to it. It could be used in a lot of different ways. It's sort of like playing the improvisational yes and game, only with a loaded gun. I'll give you an example of a knife. In my Rime of the Frost Maiden game, the characters were talking to an old frost giant warrior. And the frost giant warrior was lamenting about the fact that he was probably going to die of old age before he was going to die in a great battle. And one of the players made an offhand remark about having a horn. And he said, if you blow this horn, 13 Yetis show up. Now, the character didn't even really have a horn, much less one that could summon 13 Yetis. Until now. The frost giant, of course, says, ooh, blow it. And the player's like, okay. He's like, so my character takes out the horn and blows it. And he's looking around and the other players are looking around. I say, well, you know, everybody roll a perception check. And they roll perception. I said, you start to see Yetis showing up out of the mists. 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, 10, 12. Oh, and there's the 13th. The frost giant roars out and rushes to engage about 5 of them while the characters fight about 8. And boy, it was a hard fight. And by the end of this fight, they're standing on mountains of dead Yetis all around them. The players are all beaten up. The frost giant and his war mammoth are roaring in victory. And the frost giant turns around and looks at the character and says, blow it again. That's an example of a knife. The player just makes an offhand remark about having a horn that can summon 13 Yetis. Having the idea like, of course, he doesn't even have a horn. Except now he does. And now he does blow it. And now it actually does summon 13 Yetis. You have to be really careful when you're handed a knife like that to use it correctly. You don't want to break trust with the player. You don't want to use it in a way that makes the players feel like you're punishing them for having come up with some interesting fiction. You really want to do it when you know that you understand how to use it and when your players understand how you're using it for the fun of the game. You can create some really outstanding stories when a player hands you a knife and you use it. But you can also break trust with your players if you use it incorrectly. You really can't use a knife if you're in a position of being an adversarial DM. You can't use a knife unless you're really on the player's side and your goal is to show the heroics of the characters above everything else. The heroics of the character and the fun of the game are what drives how you use a knife when you're handed one. Using knives is a bit of an advanced technique for dungeon mastering. One of the best ways we can use it is to start small. Maybe it's not even really a knife. We just learn how to take things that the players say and turn them into bits of fiction that exist in the game. Not in a way that's going to create a great challenge for the characters, but just in a small way. Maybe it's a mannerism of an NPC or a reaction of somebody they've been talking to. Maybe it's a little bit of how the world changes based on something that they said. So we want to get used to an improvisational back and forth between the players where they bring up ideas, we take those ideas and run with them. And sometimes those ideas are going to put characters into a pretty hard spot. We want to make sure that when we do so, that we're not violating our trust with the players, that they don't feel like we're punishing them with the material that they gave us, or they're going to cross their arms and shut up and never give you anything again. When the opportunity is right, when you understand yourself and you understand your players, and they hand you something that you can use to really create an interesting situation in the game, an interesting challenge in the game, give it a shot, give it a try. Be careful. Make sure that your players are on board with the ideas that you're bringing forward. Taking a knife from a player and using it in a way that really changes the game in an interesting way is a real fun way for everybody at the table to play to see what happens. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you can support me in 4 ways. First, you can get DM tips like this directly to your email inbox by subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. Second, you can subscribe to me on YouTube. Third, you can support me directly by going to patreon.com/slyflourish and signing up as a patron. And fourth, you can pick up my books, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master or the Lazy DM's Workbook. Thank you very much and have a great day.